Everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Retro Gamers podcast. Larry here, and conspicuous by his absence is Anthony this week. He's out of office, but we have two great gentlemen on the show. A podcast well, not just, but been listening to. They're young in their years, but we got Dave and Chris from one of the best titles and one of the best theme songs for a podcast. I'm not just saying this. Two middle-aged guys trying to work it all out. TMAG for short. Chris and Dave, how are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Doing great. Well, now really, there's three of us. There's three middle-aged guys right now.
Yep.
And in spirit, Anthony's with us.
Totally.
Wherever he may be. And but no, we are very happy to be here, Larry.
Awesome.
Can't thank you enough for this opportunity.
No, I first of all, I appreciate you guys being able to come on to the show. And again, kind of on my end real quick, me and Dave have been talking a little bit. Dave, listened to the podcast, and we've been kind of going back and forth for a while. Then he said he started a podcast. I'm like, send me the link. I want to listen to it. And again, so far, awesome episodes. The ones to mention that are kind of along the line of retro gaming, your TurboGrafx 16 episode and the arcade episode, again, phenomenal. I'm not just saying that. I truly enjoyed it. Makes it worth driving into and back home from the office now. No more working from home.
That is so sweet of you to say. Thank you so much. That's quite a compliment. But yeah, it all started with Dave sending me an email completely out of the blue one day, and he said we should do a podcast, and my response was just yes. And then after that, it was figuring it out and doing all that kind of thing. And I know that your work and your podcast has been a big inspiration to him, and he turned me on to you guys. And the first moment I heard the Retro Gamers podcast, I thought, oh, Dave is the Larry to my Anthony, and it was just perfect. So I'm sorry he couldn't be here today. Maybe someday we can do this again with the four 100%. Of us. But yeah, we're thrilled to be here. To be guest host is wonderful, and I'm glad that you enjoy the episodes. We're seeing better numbers on our retro game episodes than anything else. So who knows? In a year from now, we may be a retro gaming podcast part 2.
There we go. I like it. We'll hire you.
Super two middle-aged guys trying to work it all out.
Right. And just like the two of you, I mean, me and Anthony have known each other for, oh my God, almost going on 30 years. God help us. How do the two of you kind of know each other? Like, what's your history?
Yeah, we'd be right at 28 years, I believe, Chris, is my math is correct. 25? No, it's more than maybe that. 30.
Yeah.
It's oh, good Lord, I forgot I was 46. That we were probably down at this point 36 years.
Yeah, it was elementary school that we met.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. So we've been hanging out and playing video games ever since.
Hanging out. Yeah. Getting in trouble. Watching Jean-Claude Van Damme over and over again.
Yes, I did send that Bloodsport episode to a couple of my friends as well, who aren't much into gaming, but they certainly love Bloodsport, the movie, and they enjoyed that as well.
Lots to love there.
No, totally. And like I said, I love how you guys, your chemistry with each other, obviously knowing each other helps. Me and Anthony, we met in high school, and I don't know where you are in listening to our episodes, but the first time I actually hung out at Anthony's, I got mugged on the way home. And I should have known better, but I didn't. And we're still hanging out from here on in. And I had a backpack full of Super Nintendo games.
Oh, no.
And they only wanted my money. I gave them $12. That's all I had. But thankfully, they never checked the bag. So before we get further, though, where can they find two middle-aged guys trying to work it all out?
So the primary place they can find us is 2 middleagedguys.com. That is our website, and from there you can branch off to our Facebook, our Twitter. You can get the episodes right on the website, or you can link to every possible podcast service under the sun. We're on all of them, so that would be the primary place to go. And then subscribe, download, send us an email, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. But 2 middleagedguys.com.
Awesome. And with that, we're gonna get right into this week's episode, which is going to be a fun episode here. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of it, we do have a couple questions we do like to ask guests, the few that we've had on the show. But kind of like to kind of bring everyone up to speed as far as your gaming or retro gaming lifestyle. So, and the two of you, actually, you know what, Dave, I'll throw this to you first. What was your first video game system?
The first video game system that I owned was in 1989. That would have made me about 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Under the tree, I opened up a very small, sleek Atari Junior, Atari 2600 box.
Wow.
And of course, that's 1989.
Yeah,
you know, it was and it had a couple different names. I think the Junior label was what's called in maybe some early marketing.
Oh, they just redesigned it. Yeah,
it was the very nice wedge design, attractive console to be sure. And I got Atari. I tell people this. It's not a shameful thing. I grew up really poor. My dad struggled for years to keep meaningful work as we were little kids, and it was tough, right? So. Yes. Did I put the NES on my wish list? Did I show it to my parents at the Montgomery Wards and Sears catalogs that we would get at home? And I've got a Montgomery Wards catalog up here somewhere. Like I know you and Anthony also have those. I did. I would show them the NES, right? Everybody had it. And, but I also was realistic. I probably wasn't going to get it. So with my expectations being properly set, getting that Atari 2600 was incredible. I remember I took it in my bedroom. My older brother helped me hook it up to a 12-inch black and white TV where I proceeded to play the first game I ever owned, which was Galaxian. They said that the guy at Ventures Counter recommended that. Solid choice, Ventures Counter guy. I hope he's listening. And I loved it. And the crazy thing was I was able to, over the course of the next 2 years, take that little guy, that Atari 2600, and build that collection to well over 100 cartridges because people were giving them away.
Yeah,
yeah. And because my cousin, who was about, I'd say, 7 years older than me. He was getting ready to graduate high school at the time. She had an Atari 2600 she never played. And when she heard that I had one, they put it in the garage sale and marked it down to like $5 for me. And so I got like 40 games with a ton of Activision games, your Pitfalls, your River Raid, Superman was in there. I had an incredible collection, easily over 100 carts by the end. And I could, play them pretty well. They have a very soft spot in my heart. And I also got somehow, as things got cheaper and cheaper, my mom and dad would love to go to flea markets because when you're poor, a flea market, it's kind of like going to a museum. It's kind of how it was. And I would get stuff like, I get like the Coleco Gemini Atari clone that had special controllers that look kind of like 7800 controllers, but they also had attached paddles too. It was of all the Atari controllers I've ever owned. I did own a lot of them. The nutsiest controller of all, and the best. Made all Atari games better. Made all paddle games better. It certainly upped my Yar's Revenge game. I love my 2600. I have have you ever heard of 8-bit books?
No, 8-bit books. No.
Yeah, they do like visual, and I'll grab one in a moment, but they do visual encyclopedias of systems.
I've seen books like that,
and they break down every book, or every version, system iteration, and they break down all the games, and just like do a review of the game. They talk about the history of the game, who designed it. I've got that, and I'll go through and relive my memories on the. I got the 2600 and 7800 version of that book. It's just awesome. It's a really fun, happy time, and it reminded me of. When video games were at their purest form, and in the middle of that, I also upgraded that TV, that bad boy, that 13-inch black and white bad boy was upgraded to a 19-inch
Oh,
black and
look
white.
out.
So yeah.
Now that's when you were balling. And
I was
that's when
excuse me, I was a square pixel trying to be a ball. That's what I was
true.
balling, you know. Sorry.
We're no spheres. Sorry,
No
Evil
spheres.
Otto. Chris,
Good times, man.
Wait, how about yourself, Chris? What'd you start off with?
Yeah, I also started off with an Atari 2600. It was the classic wood grain front model.
Wow.
Yeah, like the station wagon of Ataris. And I skew a little bit younger than Dave does, so a lot of my memories of the Atari are trying to figure out ET. Like that was kind of was my thing as a kid, because I loved the movie, and so I had no concept of a bad video game at that point. So I was just like, I must be doing something wrong, and just trying to constantly figure out that game. But I remember having like the Star Wars titles. Empire Strikes Back really stands out in my mind, because it's the whole AT-AT snow fight scene. Loved that. I remember there was one where you're two Jedi and it's just two lightsabers like battling it out. I don't remember the name of that game.
Oh,
but you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So I was so young as a kid that it wasn't until I was like a teenager and remembering this that I realized, oh, those were supposed to be lightsabers.
I just thought they were just sticks of some sort.
I had no clue, even though it said Star Wars all over it. But anyway, so yeah, like a lot of my memories of Atari are very young, and it's like me not understanding what I'm supposed to do.
And I'm kind of with you with that. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a cousin who was quite a bit older than me. He was probably like 15 or 16 when I was this age. And he had a ton of Atari games.
Okay.
So kind of like Dave, we didn't have a lot of resources. So the games I owned were very, very few, but he would always come over with something new that he just got, and we'd plug it in and he'd sit there and help me play it. So those are the real heartfelt memories I have with the Atari.
No, that's awesome. And I myself basically started with Atari as well. And I kind of like Chris, like you were saying, like I just kind of fumbled my way through these games. I didn't know what to do with ET. I fell in a pit, I raised my neck, and I floated back up, and I immediately fell back into the pit. So
just like the movie.
Basically, just exactly like the movie. I can see why it only took 6 weeks to make. But yeah, Atari always has that special soft spot. And when the Atari VCS came out and the world mocked me for pre-ordering and eventually purchasing the VCS, I laughed back, and I'm like, but this is now the glory I have with that wood grain in front and the official Atari in front of me, basically. So joke's on you, people who dare laugh.
That's right. That was a gorgeous design on that system.
It is a gorgeous design. It is a good idea. Just the business model wasn't there.
It works as well for yes, nowadays. Well, actually, there was some. So I like to certainly pull the curtain back a lot. This is a pre-recorded episode, so we're actually recording this a few weeks before it airs. So there was some news that actually came out here, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a few weeks prior with the episode that's going to drop normally, that Atari and Polymega are teaming up.
Really?
Yes, it was just announced as of this recording. I don't have all the details. Long story short, you'll be able to get Atari games on the Polymega, and they will make 26 and 7800 adapters for the cartridge adapters. So you'll be playing them on there, and you'll be able to play Polymega system through the VCS. Which means it might have access, because Polymega is putting out like a cheap end version of their base unit, which is the CDs. And that's, again, as we mentioned before, it's like 18 different systems, CD base alone, and they're somehow going to be able to incorporate that into the VCS. So I might finally still get a Polymega, even though I canceled it and
there you go.
Way more money than I should have. So
very interesting. I'm gonna look into that. If nothing else, the business model that they're working, it was really interesting for Polymega to see where that goes.
It really is. Like nowadays, I feel like also like if you're into computing, it's a really good like second computer or something to program on, because it's kind of based on that. There's apps on there for just straight up computing and everything. So, and it did have or it has Xbox Cloud on it, and Amazon Luna, and that wonderful Google Stadia before it disappeared. So it really almost was just acting as just like, you know what, I have all these systems, so let's put this in the other room, and we can still be able to play the games.
And you're talking about the VCS,
the VCS,
the Polymega.
The VCS,
yes. The VCS. It had what consumers. Never going far afield, but what it felt to me was like consumers wanted a plug and play retro experience with little dashes of modern flavor. But what it was instead was a modern device that could do all kinds of modern things, but only with dashes of retro flavor, right? It seemed like they didn't quite get the mix right. It's a real tough market, and especially at that price, you've got to that price is required to get the modern stuff. I think that I'm going to bring something up here that people haven't talked about in a while, but I think Amico was trying to do that, right? They were trying to do that
in
right.
Television.
The
Television Amico,
Television Amigo, what Tommy Tellerico was trying to do, and I know it's still like sort of in limbo, and whether Tellerico is still involved or not is questionable. I still think on paper that sounds like the one that could have had potential, because the vision, it was something that, I mean, I have a house with, there's 5 of us in my home, 2 of our little kids. We probably could have all played some of those games together. And if it didn't break the bank, I would have certainly tried it. But
that was the idea of it. And again, that was another one I pre-ordered, but I eventually canceled, and I did get my money back. But the whole idea was it was going to be a family system. It was going to be priced at like $180 for the system. The games were going to be, even though everything was digital, the games were going to be nothing over an E rating. And again, it was designed for family. And they even came out and said, look, we're not competing with Nintendo. We're not competing with Microsoft or Sony. We're doing our own thing. And I think that sometimes it's smart unto itself.
Yep.
So you're right. It is the Amico is in limbo. I don't know what's going on with that. And then the Atari VCS, I think, also fell off just with lack of advertising and some stuff like that. But I still love my VCS. So I'm always going to go with that.
So, Larry, the question's back to you, sir.
Bring it.
No, I
know. So we're going to go. Actually, let me go back to Chris. Your favorite arcade game? You walk in. You had that wonderful episode there, Aladdin's, and the car wash, or not the car wash, the gas station, and everything like that. So, what is your go-to? I think I know what it is, but let the world know.
Yeah, you're not going to be surprised. It's Street Fighter 2. That game, and I think I said this on our podcast. If I could have like a lifetime hours counter, I would love to know how much time I've spent on Street Fighter 2, because it's shameful at this point. Is what it is. So, and I'll take any iteration, Champions Edition, Turbo. I don't care, but Street Fighter 2.
Awesome. And Dave, how about you? Your go-to?
This one is also so similar to Chris, but I'm gonna say I have a tie that I cannot break.
Okay.
And one is obviously Street Fighter, right? We talked about it in a recent episode of our own podcast. It's just, sort of the ultimate arcade game. It redefined fighting games. Then the next would be Street Fighter, the movie, the game. No, I'm kidding. I'm just totally joking. The next one would be one I truly believe is the arcade game that made me someone who was very content with 8-bit. This arcade game made me say, you know what? I really need to get into the 16-bit world somehow. Like I'll rob a Baskin Robbins or something and get the money to get it. And that would be Golden Axe.
Really? Okay.
Which was always calling to me it was at our local putt-putt had a Golden Axe. It was in a handful of our local grocery stores at the airlocks in the front. And then, of course, our distinguished arcade, Aladdin's Castle in Springfield, Missouri, had one. But that game was the Street Fighter. I wanted to stand there and play it in the arcade forever. I wanted to take Golden Axe home and play it and master it and see what secrets it had. So I've got to give a good mention to Golden Axe as well.
All right, fair enough. I've always mentioned before my absolute go-to, without saying, Ms. Pac-Man. Let me ask you. All right, so and obviously I don't know where, so I'm not giving anything away. But like you mentioned, you guys are from Missouri, correct? So you're based out of. All right, I of course grew up in New York City in Brooklyn, but Miss Pac-Man, do you ever remember the sped up version, or do you always remember just a normal version of Miss Pac-Man? Because I feel like this is now like a what do they call that? The Nelson Mandela effect.
I do remember. I remember a sped up version. But you are correct. It may just be I've heard so many stories of it now that I've implanted that on my memory in there. But yeah, I remember it confusing me. Like, hey, this isn't the Miss Pac-Man I used to play.
Way too fast.
Yeah, exactly. And then I lost immediately, and I was like, I wasted a quarter. And I was so mad. So that's my memory of it. But yeah, like, and there are a couple of other arcade hacks that I feel like I stumbled into as a child and didn't really know what was going on. Because that was a thing early on, like before people realized, oh, laws apply to video games too. They thought, well, I could just change the code on this board and release my own thing.
And that's how Miss Pac-Man basically came about. They made a hack of Pac-Man, and Namco, whoever was at the time, was like, how about this? We'll hire you, and we'll just make this into Miss Pac-Man.
You put a bow. Brilliant. Love it.
Yeah, basically. Well, good. All right. I'm glad to know that I wasn't the only one who remembers that, because I can't play a normal speed version of Miss Pac-Man. I will lose quicker on that than I will on a sped up version. That's how adapted I am to that game. So all right, cool. So definitely one more thing here as far as, and then actually I got a good question about going back to the arcades, but Dave, again, we'll start with you. What's your favorite game series? Not necessarily your favorite game, but just series.
Yeah, this really, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, because my initial gut response, oh, that's so vanilla. I mean, but then I thought, if you were to twist this around, you were asking this question of Anthony, what would Anthony say?
Oh, Zelda, 100%.
Yeah. So I thought, I shouldn't feel bad coming in and saying 2D Mario platforming games.
Okay.
And I have a particular love for the ones on the NES, the Super Mario series. I think the Mario World ones are fantastic as well. And then in the 3D era, I think Sunshine and Galaxy are great too. And then I think New Super Mario is fantastic. And what I've been noticing, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but like on Reddit or some of the YouTubers, as soon as they announced Wonder looks fantastic. I think everyone would agree. It was like about time, because I was so tired of New looked bad back in the day. And New was so generic. One YouTuber, RGT85, kept calling it generic over and over. And I'm like, guys, don't gaslight, don't make up that it wasn't fun. It was fun. It was just, you've been playing the same game for 16 years in various flavors, which is true, right? The first came out for the DS in what was it, 80 or 2007, I think, something like
Probably.
that. So yeah, so we've been playing the exact same game for a long time, just shuffled up a bit. So it's time for something new, but that doesn't mean you can't respect the past, because New Super Mario was a ton of fun. But yeah, I love Mario. Anything, you throw him in a sports game, you let him be a referee, you let him play board games with the rest of his buddies. I'm down, but those side-scrolling adventure games, man, I just can't get enough.
Mario illegal street prescriptions, whatever it has to be done.
Definitely. Yeah, exactly. That's where I buy my street prescriptions. Is from your neighbor Mario.
Yes. Is it going to be Street Fighter for you, Chris?
No, actually, it's not. No, and this is going to add some spice to the podcast, because in the admittedly short time I've been listening, I don't think that you guys cover these games too often. But if I had to pick an absolute favorite series, it would be Final Fantasy.
Oh,
I'm a huge RPG fan.
Okay.
As much as I talk about the action games and that sort of thing, if I could only have one flavor of game for the rest of my life, it would be RPG. And I love sitting down to a 20, 40, 60, 80 hour adventure that I'm going to read more than I'm going to play and push buttons. But I love that. And where that comes from is Final Fantasy VII on the original PlayStation.
Definitive.
That made such an impact on me. I mean, when I played through that game, I felt like I just read War and Peace. I mean, it was like that level of storytelling. And so then that made me a Final Fantasy fan, and I went back and consumed all of the 16-bit, all the 8-bit, and then I've just been following the series ever since. And now I'm mad that I put off getting a PS5 as long as I did, because Final Fantasy 16 is out and I have not yet got to play it. But
oh yeah, that just dropped.
yeah. So I love me some turn-based, boring old menu combat RPGs.
Anthony definitely into Final Fantasy. And again, really kind of like 7 on, kind of like what you said. It was 7. I don't know if I'm sure he's gone back and played some of them. I don't know if he has the Pixel Perfect collection. But he's definitely into Final Fantasy. He's definitely, between the two of us, he's more role playing. I dabble very small into role playing. My favorite RPG was Shining Force on Genesis.
Oh yeah, sure.
Oh my God, I loved it. And that, as much as an RPG, but that instead of being turn-based, is what now we know as tactical or tactics, because I love Final Fantasy Tactics. Yep. Never got far into it, but I absolutely loved it. But Shining Force was my go-to, and Shining Force 2 was my go-to RPG. I don't know how I ever got it to begin with, because I definitely never was like, all right, like, I don't want to spend, I want to go and, kill things. Yeah. But here I had to, I needed to be more patient. And then I'm hopefully going to start Shining Force CD soon. And my holy grail for a while was Shining Force 3 on Saturn, which I do have now.
Oh, nice.
So I'm going to start that. My favorite series, again, just to throw it out to you guys and any new listeners as well, Mega Man. Always loved the Mega Man series. Yeah. I mean, it's a time-tested format that you really can't go wrong with. And unless it's the Battle Network series.
That's fair.
Those I weren't crazy about. But the Mega Man 1 through 11 and the X series, just phenomenal. So
that's a good choice.
Yeah,
I love me some Mega Man.
When those, and whenever like the collections came out, which is like 2 or 3 times, always bought all of them, because that Definitive Legacy one that came out recently was the end all be all. So
follow-up question to that.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you struggle, especially with like collections or with any systems, anything like that? Do you struggle with latency in your Mega Man games, or are you able to just no, I can adapt to this?
I if there is latency, well, you're talking about latency as far as like when I'm actually like input. Like,
yeah,
like
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, you push the jump button and make
it. Or just, I'm so old, I'm starting to forget how things are going. No, I did in the beginning when I first started playing. I remember this vividly. I had a Wii. Now, so we're going back to Wii and the Virtual Console, and I downloaded Super Mario Brothers for the Virtual Console. And I remember playing it, and it felt off, like by half a millisecond. Like something that we would know as gamers, but someone else probably wouldn't realize. So I'm like, what is, maybe I just don't remember the game like I used to. That's when I discovered the whole game mode on a television screen, on a television set. So that fixed 90% of it. After that, I know a lot of people do complain about like input lag and stuff for some of these modern games, or any of the Switch Online games that they have. I personally never noticed that, especially for Mega Man. So no, I with the legacy editions, I've never come across that. If it's there, I might have just magically adapted to it.
Right.
The worst lag, at least on the Switch, because that's my go-to currently, is the Switch. Worst gaming that had lag was the Genesis collection, not the not the Nintendo Genesis collection, but the separate one that was sold by Sega.
Yes,
that game had wicked lag.
I noticed that too, and I was so disappointed when I got that.
Me too. Yeah.
And I just threw it on a shelf and was like, maybe someday they'll update it or something. But to my knowledge, they haven't. But you're absolutely right. That game had terrible lag.
Oh, it was.
But yeah, I am unfortunately super susceptible to that, and so Mega Man is always my go-to game to test. Like if I get a new controller or anything, I'm like, let's load up Mega Man. Let's see if this is good or not, and then then I can move on.
It's funny. I do that with Super Mario Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
If I get like a new controller or something, I'll test it on that. If I can get through that first Goomba, I'm good to go. So, all right. So we're gonna get into and kind of talking about that, like with Genesis.
Can I ask one question?
Go for it. Go for it.
Jump right in. You guys broke into the RPGs. Actually, I'll make 2 comments. The first Mega Man game I ever owned, I'd never played a Mega Man game, so I went out and I got one because my little video store was selling this copy for $9.95.
Please don't
that
let
game
it be
was Mega Man 1.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay, yeah.
Awesome.
It was so stinking hard. And it almost turned me off the series because it was just so hard. I never beat it. And then next year, I had enough vacation money saved up on vacation. I bought a copy of Mega Man 3, which, totally changed the game. I thought I would mention that. You guys were talking about, RPGs. What is the earliest graphical RPG that you guys can recall playing on a home system?
I'm going to go back to Shining Force. There really weren't. I mean, Zelda, but Zelda's action adventure. That's not really an RPG.
It's not.
Yeah, I know. But no, I never really. The one I remember sitting down to, and I got a Genesis late. Like I was always Nintendo. Me and Anthony were both Nintendo. But I got Genesis probably like when Sonic 2 came out, like around that time. So again, a little late into the series, but Shining, and I still wish I knew what prompted me to get it. But yeah, Shining Force for me is the earliest one that I can remember.
So Dave, your question is earliest one we played growing up, not earliest one we've gone back and can still play. Is that correct?
Earliest one we played growing up, yeah.
Okay. It would be Dragon Warrior. Yeah. Because Nintendo was giving that away with Nintendo Power.
That's how I got mine.
Yeah.
But I never played it. I played it once, and I was like, I'm done.
We played through it.
Yeah,
did you?
And that was how I convinced my parents to get me a subscription to Nintendo Power, because it was like, it's a free game, and they were like, "Are you serious? What kind of what are they pulling on this deal?" But I convinced them, and we got a subscription to Nintendo Power, and Dragon Warrior came in the mail, and I put the game in, and I was like, I don't understand this at all.
Nope.
but
I loved it.
Yeah, but we kept going, because back then when you got a game, you played it. I mean, there was no like, oh, well, this one sucks. Yeah. And so I grinded through Dragon Warrior and got to the point where I really appreciated it. And that's probably what, when I came back around to RPGs later in life, that background probably helped me out a lot.
And if it's free for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
I believe that the story behind that I've always heard, Larry, I hope it's not apocryphal, is that Nintendo wanted to have a big splash with the game, with Dragon's Quest, I believe, in Japan, but they just weren't sure about its how it would be accepted by American players, so they did that limited giveaway to see what kind of buzz it generated.
I believe it was that. I don't have the full off top of my head, forgive me, and I would look it up, but I feel like every time I hit my laptop, everything makes noise. But I think also it might have been just trying to get sales, just trying to, because I do remember them when they were trying, I forgot what I was watching, but they were trying to start up Nintendo Power. And at some point they're like, look, we need to get some more sales or whatever. They're like, let's throw in a free game, really nothing wrong with that. And I remember I had Nintendo Power before Nintendo Power. I don't know if you remember that. It was started off as a bi-monthly, I don't remember the full name of it, but it wasn't Nintendo Power, but it was just like a Nintendo newsletter that came out every other month. And it was maybe like 4 or 5 issues. Wow. Then they switched.
Did you keep any of the issues?
Well, what happened, long story short, and this is not a sob story, so don't get me wrong, but living in New York when Hurricane Sandy took out, all my stuff was in my parents' basement. Yeah. And when Hurricane Sandy came through, they had 8 feet of water in a 9-foot basement. Yeah. So again, everyone's fine. Don't get me wrong. And it's in the past, but I lost everything. When you watch the newer episodes of the Retro Gamers and that collection behind me, none of that is original, except for maybe Game Boy. That's about it. I've had to repurchase everything. Be that as it may, where was I going with that tangent? I forgot what I was talking about now.
Talk about Nintendo
Dragon Warrior.
Thank you. Yeah. So unfortunately all the magazines went out, but I did own all but one, every issue of Nintendo Power I had at some point. My mom forgot to renew the subscription, and the 1 month I didn't get was the DuckTales issue.
Oh, wow.
That was the only one I ever missed out on. Other than that, I think I do have a copy of the very last issue at home where I'm at now. Nintendo Power, that was for that in game. You know what? Like I said, we're gonna talk about stuff that I don't even have written down. Besides Nintendo Power, there was like Game Pro and EGM, right?
Oh yeah, Game Pro is great. I mean, Nintendo Power was fantastic. Great writing. It was all Nintendo, of course, but I really enjoyed Game Pro. Even the ads were entertaining in Game Pro. It's like, oh, okay, it's something new I haven't seen before.
Yeah, right. I think, what's funny. I think I thought I read an article years ago about like how GamePro tried to get their their version of gaming magazine. It had something to do with, again, the way they did ads and stuff like that. I love their rating system with the guy's head exploding for
head exploding. Yeah.
And of course, every April, Lame Pro was phenomenal.
Yeah, you got your little there's some funny jokes in that.
So
it really was. Yeah.
And then it's funny. So like to me, the top three, and I don't know if there's any others around in your area, but again, Nintendo Power, GamePro, and then Electronic Gaming Monthly was like
EGM,
it was almost like Nintendo Power was Nintendo. GamePro was for like someone in their teens, kind of, and then EGM was more like adult and proper, and
you could flip through EGM and you'd get a lot more discussion around like the specifications of a PC game and the experience that you would have under one spec versus another. And if you've got, and of course going back into the 90s, and there's all sorts of esoteric hardware that certain devices would need to how many disk drives do you have and things like that. And of course it was not my favorite, even being a more technical person then somewhat, and as an adult much more. I just didn't enjoy that conversation as much. I would just rather have the Mad Magazine cracked style that GamePro was. Have fun with it, and then the outstanding maps and guides that you would get inside Nintendo Power.
Forget about it.
Indispensable. The Metroid and Zelda maps in Metroid are critical, I think.
Definitely.
But EGM was fine. I think there were a few others. Of course, now you got Game Informer, which is nothing but a big commercial, which is fine, right? I get it. And I flip. What's that?
I forgot about Game Informer. Yeah.
Yeah, I still flip through it. Now they've raised the price this coming year. It's an extra $5 to get your physical copy. I like physical magazines. I think they're cool. I'll keep it around, and I rarely use the benefits. I probably should, but I rarely do. And but yeah, Game Informer's okay. I would say that I would criticize Game Informer's writing, but there's such little writing in it. It's mostly ads and pictures.
Which might say so a lot for today's day and age.
It does. I can get most of the gaming news that I need in about 15 minutes with YouTube. So,
do you remember issues that came with demo discs?
Yes.
Which is mostly Xbox and PlayStation magazines?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And then PlayStation moving again. I'm sorry, this is just now it's all something.
You good? I love it.
And then PlayStation basically moving from a physical magazine to demo discs.
Yes.
Yep. And then that was like the whole thing. And in fact, and Dave, you'll like this. I picked up on eBay recently it was the PlayStation demo disc that featured MST3K. And,
no way.
Yeah, and it was with when Bill took over. So it was a sci-fi episodes when Bill took over as Crow. And if I remember correctly, I think they even riffed a couple of like either game commercials or like gameplay of like a first
now
level.
I'm gonna look this up.
Yeah, no, I did purchase that, and I was gonna send it away to get autographed, but I didn't want to risk losing it in the mail. So I held on to it. But definitely, if you can find that, check that out. So that's pretty cool.
That's very cool.
And to try and steer this back on, because I know Anthony's probably having a conniption if he's watching this, knowing I'm going off topic. One of the things I do want to mention is, and you kind of touched on it before, we started with Atari, then we moved up to Nintendo, then we were talking about Super Nintendo and Genesis. Nowadays it's almost, we take it for granted, the generation jumps with these new systems. Like, we're going from 360 to Xbox One and then Series X. You're just like, all right, it's starting to look realistic, but we're expecting it. Excuse me, where back in the day, going from Nintendo to Super Nintendo blew my mind as far as what the graphics were like. Do you remember when we were going, and Chris, I'll throw it to you first. Do you remember when we were going from 8 to 16-bit, whether Genesis or Super Nintendo, and when you saw what the future had to hold, and were there any games where you're like, well, I'm enjoying this on the prior system. Right. This would be awesome if it looked in, raging 16-bit graphics.
Yeah, no, I absolutely remember that. And I remember mostly because of the commercials that Nintendo pushed out. And in those commercials, they always would feature Super Mario World, which looked leaps and bounds better even than Super Mario Bros. 3. And I vividly remember that giant Bullet Bill sprite that they would feature on the
Yes.
commercial, and just blowing my mind, being like, how could we make something so large on a screen?
Right?
We have reached the pinnacle of humanity. I mean, that was pretty much the way I felt about it as a kid.
No,
And so
no, I definitely remember that. Yeah.
yeah, I could not wait to have a Super Nintendo. And unfortunately, I did wait for quite a long time. But I had a friend who was one of those kids who, parents got him absolutely everything he wanted. So he had, not only did he have the Super Nintendo, but he had like every launch title that came out, even SimCity. And I was like, why'd you buy that? But
that was a weird one to have, because I remember having it too. And I'm like, I don't want to build a city until I learned the $1 million code. Then
yeah,
I'm like,
no,
all right, now I can play this.
And like now I love it. I love that game. But at the time, I was like, well, this is lame. This is not Mario.
You and I, Chris, had that on your PC too.
Yeah, we did. We dabbled a little bit in PC gaming, which is a totally different topic. But that 16-bit transition, I was just blown away by what it could do. And I was certainly excited about Mario World, but it didn't. I don't guess it really like connected with me, ironically, until I got a Genesis with Sonic. And Sonic, the first Sonic the Hedgehog, still one of my favorite games to this day. And just the raw speed. Like, I couldn't believe how much faster that game would run versus like a Super Mario World. And I would say Super Mario was the better game, but Sonic just impressed me just technologically. And I think they did a really good job showcasing that versus Nintendo. And so like Mario impressed me visually, but Sonic impressed me gameplay wise.
I got you.
And then you've heard our stories with the TurboGrafx 16. That was actually our first dip into the 16-bit world, because that's what we ended up being able to afford. Yeah, but growing up, and especially now as a collector, I've got all of them, and I've sat through all of them. And that jump was astronomical. I mean, you talk about, we kind of expect the generation leaps.
Yeah.
I would go so far as to say the generation leaps are kind of not impressive anymore. I
can see what you're talking about.
PS4 to PS5, I think your leap isn't graphical. Your leap is like load times, which is okay. That's fine.
And immersion capabilities, right?
Right.
But AR and stuff like that.
Yeah. But looking at NES versus SNES, I mean, that's a leap.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say, Chris, with that if you put a good Xbox 360 game up against a good Xbox X game, of course you're going to see differences. But are they differences that really like change your experience? Not really. They just look better. So the technology, they got to find they're finding new ways to express the power of the technology, because the graphics just, and frankly, the realer they get, the creepier they get. So they, it's that uncanny valley where we're right deep down in that right now. So
I agree with you on that, because I read it real quick. I'm sorry. I remember they put out on the Xbox Series X, they put out a demo of Unreal Engine 5 of the Matrix. When that new recent Matrix came out. I won't lie, it blew my mind the way it looked. I mean, it looked like you were walking around an actual city. But you're right, like nowadays I'm gameplay. You know what I mean? I'm not really worried about the visual, though I will harken back to old school. Like, I'll prefer old school. Actually, I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago real quick, when Super Mario Brothers Wonder was, even before Wonder was announced, when the Nintendo Direct was announced, and everyone was clamoring, oh, a new 2D Super Mario. In my head, I'm like, oh, maybe we'll get like an old school 2D 16-bit, maybe not 8-bit, but a 16-bit Super Mario new game. And then I thought to myself, but it's, you know what? Even though I want that, it's 2023. So I get the new, having newer graphics. So like when Wonder was shown and announced, I was like, all right, that's perfect for the Switch. But the gameplay looks like it's the same. Where a lot of times with these newer games for Xbox and for PS5, which is really just a glorified PS4, when I got the PS5, there is now no reason for me to turn on my PS4 anymore. Now I just own it to own it. But yeah, to me, it's still the core gameplay.
Yeah. And that kind of desire for the 16-bit look, I think that's really being filled by indie games now. And
True.
and you've had that explosion, and the people who gravitate towards that kind of stuff. I mean, they've got Shovel Knight, they've got Shantae, they've got all these different things that kind of scratch that itch. I think Nintendo has always really smartly position themselves as saying we're not the best hardware, but we're the best experience, and they do 100%. They do really well in that market. So I think I was not surprised that Wonder was announced and that Wonder looked the way it did, as opposed to harkening back or doing something like that. And I really think, to me, when I see Wonder, I see the Super Mario Brothers movie. I think they're really pushing towards that kind of visual.
I can see that now. I didn't put two and two together on that one until you just said it. I can see that.
Yeah, I think they're leaning that way.
Dave, do you remember that leap from, that leap from 8 to 16 or yes, going from Nintendo to somehow you guys grabbing a TurboGrafx, which still boggles my mind that two people, everyone knows one person who had a TurboGrafx. The two of you had TurboGrafx.
Yes. The Turbo was interesting. And I'll speak to the Turbo and then I'll set it aside as I go a little deeper into this, because the Turbo was interesting. To me, it was about the mystery, because there wasn't games on there that we really recognized or knew. We knew of Splatterhouse because it was in the news, right? It was during the time when violence in video games. So we knew of that because of that. And we knew a little bit about Bonks because we saw it in GamePro, a little bit at Legendary Axe, where we had also seen it in GamePro and other things. But for the most part, the games were, blank slate stuff. I mean, what were they? They could be, what would JJ and Jeff really be like? We found out. It was just as odd. But so there was that mystery that was driving us towards that system. And there were no expectations other than, we knew it looked colorful and these would be unlike other games we had played. And it truly held up in all those regards. For me, going into the 16-bit era, I had my my Nintendo, and my next stop was, after about 2 years, amassed sort of kind of a collection, not much of one, just because we didn't have a lot of money. We rented a ton, and unlike my Atari, I was able to buy them dirt cheap. I wasn't able to, so I probably had 10-ish games, something there. Borrowed a lot of games. Most of them I returned, Chris, if I believe.
That's true, yeah.
But when I looked at it, I was looking at the Genesis. What I was thinking was that machine is going to let me play the arcade games I love at home. And I will be able, they'll look just as good. They will control just as good, but I will be able to, play them anytime I want and as much as I want without a bucket of quarters. And I saw that with, certainly we had mentioned, Golden Axe. I saw that with, Afterburner. I saw that with Pit Fighter. Somehow, God bless Pit Fighter.
But I hate that game with a passion.
It's doing its best as can, but it's I saw that with mini games like Commander. My mind just went blank. But I saw the arcade experience at home. I saw the 3-button controller as being all right. Now I can have all 3 buttons for Golden Axe, right? And then potentially, in the future, Golden Axe 2. I saw Altered Beast as what a genius pack-in game. And you had mentioned that in the last episode about the potential, risk of putting a game with some darker imagery, if you will.
It was basically the Bible Belt that caused Sonic to be the because of that demonic. Well, there you go.
I live by the Sonic. Third buckle. Yeah. Right there. No, it's so to me, all I could think about with 16-bit in particular was arcade at home, right? And then with the Nintendo, I was a little less engaged in the Nintendo because first of all, I had a Nintendo, and I was like, well, these look pretty similar, just a graphical upgrade, but same games. But I did have interest in a couple series in particular. I was very curious about where Mario was going to go. Because I thought Mario 3 was like the pinnacle of gaming. It's like, where do they go from here?
I mean, they made a movie around it essentially with the Wizard.
Yeah.
So
they're right.
It was a big one giant commercial.
Yes, riffed by our friends Mike, Bill, and Kevin.
I own that one.
Yeah. and then you also want to see where Zelda was going to go, because it had the incredible Zelda, and then you had the Adventures of Link, which was different, not bad, but different. And then, what are they going to do? What are they going to do with this next edition? And so there was mystery there. And then, of course, like, we're going to get a new Metroid. Is it going to blow our minds like the first Metroid did? So I really wanted to see that progression as well. So I had very different interest in both systems and things I was looking forward to. So how much deeper do you want to go, or do you want to keep asking around?
You actually you kind of touched on a point, and Chris kind of mentioned it a little bit before as well. Arcade, bring the arcade home, and for that part, that's where you almost get the Super Nintendo versus Genesis. And even though, again, being Nintendo heavy on our end, Genesis definitely did better with any arcade versions or arcade ports. And I forgot exactly what you said, Chris, on your episode about arcades, but you did mention getting the home versions of like Street Fighter 2. But I just forgot which one you preferred, in all honesty.
So I would probably go with the Genesis version.
Okay.
Yeah, and even though it's a lot crunchier in the soundtrack than the Super Nintendo version, you had the 6-button controller, which I think was far superior to the Super Nintendo controller. That's blasphemy to some people's ears, but I'm sorry, that Genesis 6-button controller is phenomenal.
I'm just so used to my fingers there on the top.
Right, you got those.
But it was on for Street Fighter. I'm not gonna lie. Now you're right.
It absolutely was.
Yes.
But there was, and also going from that brick of a 3-button Genesis controller to the svelte 6-button.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, to me, like, that was a bigger revelation than like a 32X was. And so when you combine that 6-button controller with Street Fighter, I mean, that, to me, that was golden.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I was gonna say, Dave, your comment on that. So like your go-to with Street Fighter, say, would be probably, oh boy, look at those. Oh, those
I got a couple examples.
There we go.
Here's the 8-bit do knockoff. This is really the Saturn knockoff.
Those are good ones.
Let's be real, guys. The Saturn and the Sega Genesis 6-button are almost the same control. They're tweaked.
They're basically. I think they put out one that you can use in both anyway. One company does. Maybe not them. Maybe it was one of the other ones. I forgot.
And then this is a Nyko ripoff of the Super Nintendo, which is just okay, but it's wireless. But the
detail looks so tiny on that one.
It does, because I think it's because the overall the controller is bigger, but the D-pad actually looks pretty similar to my other one. I'm in a thrift store closet in here.
Chris made a good point real quick with the Genesis 3-button controller, because these mitts are not designed for tiny controllers, but when they shrunk it down for the 6-button controller, it was much more comfortable to use. And who put it out? Maybe not Hyperkin, but somebody put out a 6-button Genesis controller sized as the 3-button Genesis controller.
Oh wow,
really?
Yes, I forgot who it was. Whoever's working with Sega who puts out official.
Is it Retrobit? Maybe
might have been Retrobit. Yes, thank you.
Retrobit.
But yeah, it's so
that's
size
a big
of the
controller.
3-button, but it's very very. It's kind of like when the Xbox came out. The
Duke
was enormous.
My gosh,
I never understood that. The Type S controller that they came out with was wonderful, and I thought. Was that generation's controller. It was fantastic, even better than the great GameCube controller. But that
so many buttons in so weird places.
It's just it's like a puzzle. But I do have to ask this, guys. We're talking about the 16-bit mainline controller wars. Okay, right? And you got this guy right here,
the 6-button Genesis.
6-button Genesis, fantastic face games for fighting, right? Then you've got the response, that's the response, right? There was a 3-button and they came out with this. Then you've got the original one here. I'm showing up, the
Super Nintendo
version, Super Nintendo, right? Super Nintendo, I'll make this case, out of the box they weren't thinking about arcades. They weren't thinking about a specific game experience. What they were doing is doing what Nintendo always does. They were innovating, and they came up with a 4-button face, 2 side triggers, and a way to control games comfortably across multiple genres that would last the whole generation, and that would keep up with whatever arcade action happened to come in. The Genesis folks, they made a wonderful controller here. but they just responded. They responded to their 3-bit controller, which they put together because at the time they needed 3 buttons to play all their arcade hits. So I would argue that as much as I love the 6-button, the folks at Nintendo, and they have a pattern of doing this, they were innovating when they did this design, just like nearly a decade before that, they innovated with their gamepad design and did away with the joysticks. And then a few years later, they innovated with the N64, brought analog in the trigger configuration. Yep. And then they innovated again with the GameCube. And then really so you see there's a pattern there. So as much as I love and I respect the 6-button, I have to go back and say there's a reason why Nintendo didn't have to respond. That's because they built a controller that would work in all seasons of that system's life, and it was really smart. But one last question. This may be a technical question.
Just real quick, my feeling with the 6-button Genesis, not only a response to Nintendo, but a response to gaming. Like when Mortal Kombat came out, then like you had to use a 6-button controller. So I feel like they also just needed it for gameplay.
They did.
You know what I mean? It was absolute necessity.
Yeah, they were doing more. They were more forward thinking. Nintendo has always had vision, right? I think they're not perfect. They make mistakes, but yeah. But I want to ask one question, maybe a little technical, but you put these two guys up. Of these two controllers, we'll talk factory editions, not these knockoffs. Which of the two would you want powering your homemade submarine that you're going to take down to the bottom of the ocean?
Well, I got to imagine that the the Genesis version, at least you have everything right there in front of you. So you don't have to worry about maybe any, it's more thumbs than fingers. But quite frankly, I mean, for $250,000 a pop, I would imagine maybe go with that 6-button Genesis controller and maybe rebuild a better ship.
Yeah, well, fair point, Chris.
I'm gonna go Super Nintendo for the reason I want access to as many buttons at once as I can have if I'm piloting a submarine. It's like that seems like
that's a good call.
That seems like something I'm gonna want.
That is a good call. Yeah. Or they should have done what the Ghostbusters did and use an NES Advantage.
Yes.
Come on now. Yes. If it's good for the Statue of Liberty, it's good for a little crappy submarine going down to the Titanic.
Well,
welcome to the Retro Gamers.
The reality is, guys, is that the Genesis controller was only rated to depth of 10,000 feet. You would have had to with the Super Nintendo. It could get down to 18,000 feet. So,
well, there we go.
Oh, I love it. Well, then you know what? Because actually, we're gonna start wrapping things up here. But again, I'm just gonna throw it out. Now that we're talking controllers, what's your favorite controller design? I'll tell you mine. Mine's the N64. Absolutely love the N64 controller.
It's an excellent controller, purpose built for that machine. And if you're going to compare it to other controllers, it's going to lose. But
I see what you're talking about. But for what, using it for the way it's meant,
yes,
you know what I mean?
Yes. If you're using it for the way it's meant, it's an excellent choice. If I had to choose a favorite controller, universal, I would pick the DualShock 4.
Okay.
I think that was a really, really well made. Well, okay, it wasn't well made because they break all the time, but it was a very well designed controller. It's very comfortable in my mitts.
All right, Dave.
I am going to have to do two because I'm going to do pre-analog and post-analog.
Oh, look at you! What is going on here?
I would say
simple question.
In the analog world,
we're not a smart podcast. I'm just letting you know.
I'm going to go with the Xbox 360 controller. I find it very comfortable and very capable, and really just does what I think I need a controller to do.
You know, funny enough, just real quick, I'm going to interrupt you again. Hyperkin put out a 360 designed Xbox Series X controller.
Yes, I saw that. I think it's a very wise move.
I think they called it the Xenon or something like that.
Yeah. And I'd say, gosh, pre-analog days, I mean, there's two that just come to mind. But I'm going to give it to the 6-button Sega Genesis.
Okay.
The runner-up would be the NES controller. I loved it. Something about the squareness just always felt right. But
classic.
But I'm going to go with the 6-button Sega Genesis or the Sega Saturn, where virtually identical controllers. Mm-hmm. But I thought, as far as just non-analog, they really killed it. I never got to use an analog Sega Saturn, though. I would love to see how it is.
No, I keep seeing. Oh, I'm sorry.
You're not missing much.
Wasn't very good. Did it have an analog kind of like the Dreamcast? Is that it? I heard the thumbsticks like
it curves inward down like a V, which makes it very awkward to hold. So like most controllers you're holding like this, that controller you hold like this. It's very bizarre. I got one. I'll bring it over next time.
Yeah.
It looks like a disc, right? Is that the big circle? Yeah.
Right. And they did the analog for Nights into Dreams.
Yes.
Which to Dave's earlier point was a response to the N64. Because when Mario 64 came out and we had this 3D control with an analog stick, that Sega with their Saturn was like, oh, we don't have that. We got to design something. And made an interesting controller and an interesting game, but it was a reaction. And so that's something interesting that you see a pattern emerging now.
I absolutely. That's kind of my business, is I do this in technology, not in video games, but that's how I kind of enjoy video games now, is looking through the lens of other things. And Nintendo, they have their losses, to be sure, but my goodness, they have some great innovation stories behind their products. So it's really cool stuff.
Anthony would kill me then if I didn't ask for your comments on one of my favorite game systems that Nintendo put out that a lot of people may not be fancy about. That would be the Virtual Boy.
The Virtual Boy, I tried the Virtual Boy once, and I wasn't sure if it was my migraine headache or upset stomach was going to get me out of it first. I feel like it was ahead of its time, and that the technology was not ready. But there was a good idea. I think that if they had invested like 5 years of R&D and worked on some of the issues and actually truly made it a portable device, then you could have had a functioning VR headset before 2008. But I just felt like they came out with something too soon. It was just too limited. But certainly it's an interesting experience. But if you're all motion sick or have migraines, boy, stay away from that.
Chris, you ever get a chance to try one?
I've tried one. It's a hole in my collection. I wish I had one.
Tough, yeah.
It not only is it tough. I mean, you can get a working system for a reasonable price, but the games are just
that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did try one in the store display, and of course I don't remember how old I was, probably 12 or 13 when that came out. And since it said Nintendo on the side, I was like, Mom, Dad, you have to buy this for me. And of course they said not on your life, and that was the end of that. So
we've told the story before, but I'll tell it again, and this is true, and as to why, especially in the first year, maybe first 2 years of the podcast, I hate saying this, but we had the hashtag VB sucks that Anthony and a friend of the show started, Charles. I got Virtual Boy like day of, or maybe that Christmas, and I loved it. I loved this stupid thing, and I brought it over to Anthony's. I'm like, hey, you got to try this. So this is like 95, right? 96, maybe 95. Put it on. I set it up on the table for such a portable device. Had to break his legs out and set it up, the whole thing. And he sticks his head in, and he played maybe like 10 minutes, and he just goes, "This is the worst thing I've ever played in my life. This thing is terrible." I'm like, "You don't know what you're talking about." I take it back and I'm playing it, and to this day, he never enjoyed it. Whereas I truly loved, and I think one of the biggest misses Nintendo did was not releasing Virtual Boy games on the 3DS.
I know. I was waiting for that the entire life of that system.
Honestly, that would have been perfect, because I will, and again, I've said it before, I will put Wario Land Virtual Boy in like a massive top 100 list. That will that might even be somewhere in the top 10, because that platformer was phenomenal. Forget about the 3D look to it, just the gameplay to it was one of the best Virtual Boy games of all time, and one of the best platformers that unfortunately a lot of people are never going to play.
Yeah. So, too bad.
But with that, we'll wrap everything up then, and guys, truly, thank you very much for being on the show. Tremendous help, first of all, and just I really love you guys. I love your show, and the way me and Anthony talk on the show and we reminisce about things. That's what I love about you guys, because you guys have known each other for so long, and it's just a conversation that you're having, and I feel like I'm part of that conversation. So again, thank you for being here.
Well,
our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I started listening to you a few years back. First episode I found, I needed to take a walk, and I wanted to listen to something that wasn't news. And I found you guys. I just picked an episode. It was I believe it was the first appearance of Jake Jack when he was talking about emulation. And
Yes.
And I listened. I was like, this is pretty good, and I just kept listening. And so I was a fan. And when I reached out to you and said, hey, you were starting a podcast, and I'll explain it to you. I'll explain to your listeners as I did to you. I've always wanted to do a podcast or a radio show. I had some aspiration for that, and you could see me on video. You could probably tell why I was sticking to the audio side of that world. But I never really had the courage and wasn't sure where to start. And as I was listening to Larry and Anthony, I recognized that this is a new world, that the technology has democratized who can write books, who can, do video production, who can be on the radio, quote marks, podcast. And we could certainly give it our best shot. And I reached out to my friend Chris. He said yes. And, and here we are, several episodes in, and now having a crossover with my favorite podcaster, which is you have no idea how much this means to me. But I want to thank you. You and Anthony inspired me. You answered questions. I would bounce stuff off of you about just stuff, what to do, what not to do. And I want to thank you for being my friend. You didn't know me. You didn't have to help me, but you did. And that's so cool. And anytime you want us back for any reason, we will be here. And we cannot wait to set up the episode of TMAG where you guys come on our show and we give you guys a hard time for an hour and a half or whatever.
100%.
Looking so forward to it.
Looking forward to it. Well, thank you for those kind words. Truly, I will always be humble. Where I am not good with praise. I cannot accept praise. So hearing those kind words, truly thank you very much. And I'll never get used to that. Just knowing that I was able to help someone start their journey of this podcasting, that basically I got started because I was listening to Kevin Smith do his podcasts. So that's where I got my start from. So thank you both, truly, again, for listening, for being on the show. And one more time, let the world know where they can find you guys.
We are at,
Nope, you do it, Dave.
All right, I'm fine. Shoot, I lost the contest. Go down to your computer in the living room or in the closet. You probably have it locked. Control-Alt-Delete, and then put your password in. I do not know your password, folks. I am kidding, of course. We can be found on Facebook. 2 Middle-Aged Guys on Facebook. That's numeral 2. Just search on that. You'll find us. We are on Twitter. We are at 2 Middle-Aged Guys. 2, the number 2. But the best place to reach out to us, also, you can find us on all the different podcasting sources, Apple, Google, YouTube, you name it. If they got a podcast, we found our way in there. But for our favorite place, go check out our website, 2, the number 2, middleagedguys.com. And from there, you're going to see stuff about our podcast, a little bit about Chris and I. I occasionally write stupid essays, which are very stupid. You can come read them and shake your head at me. And then shoot us an email. Shoot us your thoughts, either on social media, on Twitter. And if you listen to the show, you like the show, subscribe, leave us an email or leave us a review or two, because those reviews are what drives the algorithms that get us noticed. We're not here to make money. We're not here to get the HelloFresh ads. But HelloFresh, if you're listening, I'll sell your crappy microwave beef or whatever. No, we're really not. We are here because we have something like the Retro Gamers, right? We have something we want to talk about that we're passionate about, and we want to talk to you about it. That's it. No strings attached. Just having a good time.
I love it. You may not get HelloFresh. You may not have, I mean to step on you. You may not have HelloFresh, but wait to get that Manscaped.
The Manscaped dollars.
I'll tell you about that later. And with us, of course, you can find us again pretty much everywhere this podcast. You can find us on Instagram at Retro Gamers Podcast, on Twitter at Retro Gamers Pod. Because we're on Instagram, I'm sure we have a Threads now. So you can find us there also. Of course, here on YouTube, hit that thumbs up, hit and share with everyone. And both Retro Gamers Podcast and two middle-aged guys trying to work it all out. Yes, give us those 5-star ratings. You can tell us you like us or you hate us. Just give us 5 stars. That's all we're looking for. And of course, you can email us. Email at theretrogamers.com. And even though this episode is a bit out of order, I am going to say this because we didn't review a game of the week. I'm sure we did one last week, but in honor of these guys, Street Fighter 2, any version you got, if you have nothing else to do this week, go out and play Street Fighter 2. And
I'll be at the gas station taking on all comers. I'm the fat guy playing Chun-Li, only Chun-Li.
My go-to is Chun-Li as well. And you know, Chris, who's your go-to in Street Fighter 2?
Ryu with Chun-Li is a second.
Interesting. So, very cool. Yeah. All right, folks. And with that, we will catch you everywhere next week on the Retro Gamers Podcast.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.